Hello, everyone. Welcome from Nonviolence in Myanmar talk series. This series is aiming to explore what are the possibility and opportunity for the future of nonviolent activism in Myanmar, so that the audience can explore or learn or even participate in the future movement, whether in Myanmar or around the world. I'm Yetet. I'm from Freedom Fighter Myanmar. And here with me is Yashua from Nonviolent International. So, Yashua, how are you?
I am fine and much better than many of our suffering friends in Myanmar.
Yeah. So yeah, last week in the first episode, we discussed you touched a little bit about the last 5 year Myanmar struggle, the Spring Revolution or the People struggle. You mentioned that there are many beautiful tactical movement, but there is a strategic component missing. So we'll try to talk more on that today. So before diving into Myanmar, let's start with the some framework. So what is you like strategic or strategy in nonviolence? What is strategic nonviolence for you? How that is different with the what you mentioned, the tactical nonviolence?
Tactical nonviolence is tactics. So there is a tactic of having a general strike and the organization that has to go behind that to have a general strike. That's a tactic. It's not a goal. Strategy is about goal. So you may use a variety of tactics in a sequence to get to your goal, but you have to know how is each one building towards your goal. So there are many beautiful tactics that occurred directly after the coup. Um, the beautiful things with the arts in Rangoon and other cities. Um, there was the banging on pans in the evening and the singing of songs, which just infuriated the military, but it didn't really give them an adversary because they claim that they are the defense of the peoples, but these were the peoples. So it was causing a moral dilemma for them. And one of the reasons that the instructions came down for oppression was because this really frightened the junta, frightened the military leaders. Strategy is about what are you trying to do? So what is the goal of the movement in Myanmar? It's a question for you right now.
Okay, it's hard to say. After the coup, yeah, lots of the people revolt or resist because like the people leader Aung San Suu Kyi was detained, and also the election result was not respected, and there was a coup. And yeah, and then later I was spiraling because one military do more oppression, people feel more angry, so they think they need to do more. So that's going to cycle by cycle. That um, right now the hatred and also there are lots of hatred or dislike to military more and more growing. That grievance are accumulating more and more. So that will be more. That will be the key driving force, I would say. About the goal, it's different from people to people. So yeah.
Okay. As I usually hear it put, is people want to get rid of the military dominance in Myanmar. This is how it's generally framed. You gave a history of occurrences, but the thing that seems to be driving people is anger towards the military, as you said. Um, and in the case of the armed resistance, it is to conquer the military. Um, I would say that the goal is better governance that brings human well-being to the people of Myanmar. It's not usually said by this, but I see this as the meta goal behind it. And there's no faith that the military can do that. So I would say the goal of the movement should be better governance of the country, one that inspires trust, makes people feel safe, and prioritizes human well-being. I think there would be no argument with most people on that. And there's mostly no argument within people who do not like the military is not going to be able to bring that. So the strategic goal will be, how can you undermine the military's power to exercise governance? Or how can you change their will to exercise governance? So there's two things here, power and will. You undermine their will, doesn't matter how much power they have. You undermine their power, doesn't matter how much will they have. Either one of those brings you to a victory. So these are the goals of any nonviolence movement, essentially, is to undermine the power of the undesired group to do the undesired thing, or to change their will to do that. If you change their will, doesn't matter how much power they have. If you undermine their power, doesn't matter how much will they have. These are the goals, and this is what you want to seek to accomplish. You also want to alter the will of supporting social groups who support the military for whatever reason. There may be groups in Myanmar society who support the military for both good and bad reasons. So how can you undermine their will? The counter side of that is, how can you increase the will of the people to resist? And how can you increase their power to resist? So while you're trying to decrease the power of the adversary, you try to increase the power of the people. This may be through educational programs or whatnot, but if you're calling for an action, like say a general strike, how does that move us towards one of these two areas? How does it undermine the power or the will of the military? How does it increase the power and will of the people? Well, one of the ways a general strike, and just using that example again, people feel empowered when they're mostly feeling powerless when they do it, because they can see how much of a negative reaction there is out of the regime. And so it does empower the people to do a general strike. And that increases, then when they feel a little bit more powerful, that increases their will to continue to do things that will make them feel more powerful. So it accomplishes those strategic goals to an extent. So how is it moving you towards the final one? So the final goal is a huge goal. I mean, the military in power took how many years to achieve in Myanmar? Well, it's gotten higher or lower at different times in history. But it's been a long time to entrench itself, and it's built more infrastructure around the country and more alliances abroad in order to keep its power. And so everything that the movement does needs to be thought of in line is, how is this moving us towards our goal of decreasing their power or will in either the national sphere or the international sphere? Now, we have a number of examples of many of those things going on, but how coordinated are they, and how much are they focused on a vision? I was reading today a new report just released today by ISP Myanmar on the ceasefire process. And I don't want to put words in their mouth, but primarily they're outlining the current ceasefire process by the military regime as a strategic act to undercut the unity of the resistance. I would agree with that. I would agree with the idea that that is how the military is approaching the ceasefires with some ethnic armed groups, and why they are doing it group by group, it does undercut the unity. But it's not totally the military. The military is seeing a lack of unity there that it exploits. And this element was not brought out by the ISP report. The ISP report seemed to, even though they gave a nod to it in the final paragraph, not suggesting that ceasefires had any viability, just the opposite. It's like ceasefires are just a process to undercut the unity, and therefore we should not, the message seems to be we should not engage in any ceasefires. That's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Ceasefires do accomplish something, and if they're not accomplishing that, you have to ask, why is the ceasefire not accomplishing that? How can you build unity to undermine the deunifying factor of bilateral ceasefires? Why isn't it there? That question is not being asked in the ISP report. I've had a lot of respect for ISP Myanmar, so I don't want to sound like I'm too negative. This is a critical comment on the report, which is a very good report and brings up and makes clear a number of dynamics that are going on. But I think that I think that they needed to look at how can we make ceasefires stronger where they seem to be, let's not go down that line.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. So you mentioned the key ideas of strategic nonviolence is to undermine the adversary will and power, at the same time strengthening the people resistance will and power. So this is a key concept of strategic nonviolence. Um, yeah, in general, I think everyone would agree in Myanmar also, like we are working to undermine the military power to fight against military, at the same time want to build the power. So I think that part, in general, I think people would agree, and also they think lots of people think they are doing it. But you mentioned, but still, like the Myanmar struggle is still tactical. So what's a missing gap or link that you feel?
The activities that people are doing, they're doing wholeheartedly. I see that. And some people have been willing to die, and some people have died doing these activities, which is noble. And therefore, we need to make sure that these energies are not wasted. If you choose a path of violent resistance, a violent conquering of the adversary, there are a few things about that. It limits the sectors of the population that can engage in the struggle. It becomes predominantly, although not 100%, young men of a certain age. It requires getting more and more arms. And the process of choosing violence changes the people who have made that choice. It's not just a decision to do that, and at the end of the process of using violence to get your means, and let's say you're successful, you aren't the same person you are when you started the struggle. So it changes, and there are a lot of examples of how movements of people who were facing oppression and used violent means changed into something that was not really noble at the end of the process. The way in which historians state it is violent revolutions tend to eat their children. With nonviolence, there is a much wider variety of participation. Every sector of society, even children, can engage in nonviolence. It's much open to the elderly. It's much more open to women. Remember the hanging of women's sarongs over the street so that the military would have to walk underneath them, which pissed them off no end. They were ending up throwing stones at houses on a regular basis. How ridiculous is that? It makes them look ridiculous. There's a whole wider spectrum of activities. Now, the mass of people that came out in the cities to show their displeasure with the seizure of power by the military in 2021 was eventually countered. And when they started setting up barricades and putting on helmets and using shields, they started to look like a military adversary to the military, and it justified using more violence at that point. I saw that as a key turning point in the struggle because the people started to look much more like a military adversary. They finally had something that looked like what they were trained to fight. They're not trained to fight people who are putting on mock weddings in the street and singing songs and stuff like that. So that was a huge turning point, and it allowed them to use violence more freely because they were in their domain of activity that they were trained for. At this point, the struggle really needed to go to diffuse tactics. Forget about crowds. You want to give them as few targets as you can while maintaining a united front on the resistance. The former Eastern Bloc was very successful in doing this over a long period of time, years, where they used diffuse tactics because it was a heavy police state and any crowds was difficult to mobilize. But mass activity on an individual level throughout the country was impossible to suppress. And this, I think, is where the movement needs to be at this point in time. Using tactics that build more unity because they're sustained and they go on for a long period of time on a mass level, but not with a mass presence.
Yeah. Yeah, I agreed about the violent part, like violent resistant, even in the mass movement. It is what we call more about a small scale violence or fringe violence. I would say it's the very small level barricades and Molotov compared to the automatic gun from the military. It's quite very tight play, but still it's on appearance it provoke the military will to fight as you mentioned. Yeah, so that turning point is also need to land deeper because like some of the Ali group are later considered as a provocateur from the military. Some of the Ali groups we call defense group, so it's they wear security uniform like a with like kind of vest and some kinds of equipment. But later some of the groups, some of the Ali groups turn out to be kind of affiliated with military. So that part is also quite interesting to learn more. And about the diffuse part, I think people already try a lot, like for example, silent strike or flower movement in the remembrance of Aung San Suu Kyi. Like these are the like more like diffuse action people do. But I think military from time to time, military is more how can I say? They use more power to oppress. But what more problematic is I feel like there's a missing point from the opposition when the repression comes. Because oftentimes when the repression comes, the will of people actually increase to do something more. But 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 that's I think in the early stage, in the honeymoon period, I would say. But later year, this kinds of activity, people feel like not effective. There are lots of campaigns and lots of activities, throughout. We call there like lots of calendar days. So there are lots of historical days or memorial days. So people do lots of campaigns, and later people feel burnout and like we have done this for like years, and what are the effects? What are the results? So people ask the question. So that's why I feel like later years, especially 2023, 2024, these kinds of movements are hard to see. Yeah.
Well, this is long-term thinking. I mean, it's short-term thinking that people say we tried it and there's no effect. Really? Well, why does the military get so upset if there's no effect? Um, I mean, they hate this stuff. And it's hard for them to do anything militarily. When they see armed groups out there, they know exactly what to do. They're trained for this. This is what they've mobilized for. This is what they've built their entire infrastructure for. But when it's the population, they're infuriated because they feel powerless. And so feeding that powerlessness on their part is what needs to be done. And again, remember, their power did not start in February 2021. They've been building that type of infrastructure for decades. And so the struggle may take a very, very, very long time. Now is not the time to give up hope. Now is the time to apply more pressure by the state. And so it needs to build with this understanding that this is going to go on for a while. For a number of years now, the National Unity Government has said victory is just around the corner. And I think that that has been a little unhelpful because it makes people think, okay, we're almost there. And then when we're not, they get disheartened. This is going to be a long-term struggle because it took a long time for the military to get where it is, and it's going to take a long time to turn that around. But things have to build towards that time.
Yeah, I agree. Um, you mentioned the violent component of affiliated and that bring the military will to fight, and also you bring the kind of false hope or like false narrative of like a short-term vision creates like we don't have preparation for a long term. But what I would like to add is that I think it's as you mentioned, it begins before the coup. The military power begins a coup, and also I think the resistance also before the coup, we need to see some of the background. So it was the time of NLD ruling era, 2015 to 2020. At the same time, also NLD win the majority seat in 2021, in 2020 election. But around the time, the military has been preparing this campaign for like a few months. Like at first, the political party go and meet with the military senior general, and then yeah, yeah, especially the losing party, they don't like the election results. And then that start to fuel about election fraud and lots of campaign from the military. But the opposition side didn't have much reaction toward that. They didn't care much about that. NLT or UEC. At the time, UEC, the election commission is controlled by the president, which is the NLT, NLT from the NLT party. So like that side didn't react because from the constitution, like the presidents and UEC are the decisions are final about the elections. This is actually giving favor to those in power that do that in constitution. But NLD used this constitutions as a given to refuse all the requests from the party or the military side to do the how can I say to answer the question about the election fraud. I think that's create grievance more and more between the political parties. Even some of the democratic parties in opposition to military side also feel that way. There is some kinds of uh, special advantage that NLD gained because there was an era of COVID period, and NLD using their health campaigns can attract people, but other party cannot do much activities at the time. So they feel that this election is not a level playing field. So these kinds of grievance come, and also there was kind of relationship problem or like communication problem between NLDs and other ethnic parties before. So these kinds of things add up. But what most important for me is like NLD doesn't have any plan to do after the coup. one military do the coup. There is no advanced plan. So I think that part is also tell why why we do lots of things, but that's like becoming kind of chaotic or missing in a way because one of the CC member of NLD later tell that there's no preparation about the coup. So NLD, even they are in power and the main opposition force, but still they don't have the plan. So I think that's why lots of the campaigns ideas are coming from people from social media, influencers, and everyone can be leader this time, but that means there's no accountability, there's no way to coordinate each other. So I think that's quite uh, difficult to make a coherent strategy. Yeah.
There are a lot of divisions in society which hurts the unified response. And the military is incredibly aware of those and exploits them to their advantage.
Yeah, we always see like military use the colonial strategy, like divide and conquer. Like this is their power, this is their way. But I sometimes I feel like why can't we use the same way? Because we often see military as a compound, as a single entity. I feel like everyone associated with the military is a military, it's under the military. That's how we feel. Even soldier, general, even the monks or like the cronies or everyone, even the school teacher, everyone under the military bureaucracy, military machines and military systems. Everyone are considered to be military affiliated persons. So this is why I feel like we cannot create more wise or like more smart strategy to see how there are different groups compelling power each other, and also each group has different interests, each layer has different interests. Then we can create better strategy. I feel like now we are missing that. Even right now, I feel like in this time, Myanmar is trying to reform the system as more like personalistic regime because he don't have a lead right now. The from 2008 constitution, the senior general of the military has an overall power, like de facto power. But now he is trying to control from the president's side to the military. So he is trying to reform, I think, more like the Hun Sen Cambodia. So like there are tension every time. Like that's why the military leader always try to take out lots of positions next to him in the last 5 years. He take out he purge lots of people because I think he afraid the most is the people close to him. What he afraid most. So I feel like there are lots of way to see there are like struggles and divisions and contradiction even in the big complex system like the military institution, but we don't exploit that part. I think that's also missing part in the strategy component. That's what I feel like.
This is part of changing the will of the oppressive group or changing their power to do so. So they've got different groups underneath that. Yeah, the military is not a homogenous block. It's got shades of opinion running through it. And there are different reasons why people are within that institution. So which ones can you influence? Which persons in the corporate circle, the economic circle that supports the military in one way or another, either willingly or unwillingly, which ones of those can you influence? There are different groups in the civil service that are never going to join CDM because they may have 20 members of their extended family dependent on their salary for survival. They're not going to quit their job, but there are things that they can do that support the movement. And I know in some cases that's already occurring because it has to be quiet. But how can you increase that type? How can you chip away at all of these pillars that support the military regime on the top? And this is done strategically in some other countries. There's groups in the Balkans, for example, especially the Milosevic government, which was brought about by a people's movement over a long period of time. They used a lot of the power of humiliation to humiliate the ruler because autocrats have a very thin skin. So there's a role for artists and musicians here. And there's a role for the way in which you tone your graffiti all over the country. You might have 1 month where you focus just on one thing, but it has to happen everywhere. This shows that unified response that will infuriate the autocrats, and yet they feel powerless at the same time. But it has to be this, again, it's a tactic, has to be building towards something.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is important to know deeply of how military work. I think it's always important to know about the people side, what are the components, how people work together, what are the forces behind, and also I think it is important to know how military system works so that we know what are the weakness and what are the way we can exploit or what we can use to fight against.